You ever wonder why some people just freeze when cops tell them to step out of the car? I'm not talking about someone being difficult just to be difficult. I'm talking about those moments where something deeper is going on, and you can feel the fear through the screen. In this case, what started as a simple stop turned into a scene that left officers speechless, because the truth was nothing like they expected. This is the story of one woman, one car, and one police stop that spiraled into something way more emotional than anybody could have predicted. On the surface, it looked like just another case of someone refusing to follow orders. But once the truth came out, it left everyone, even the cops, asking themselves hard questions. Do you think the officers handled this right? Or did they go too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments because this one's heavy. So here's what happened. Bodycam footage shows officers pulling up behind a car that's been sitting there for too long. Engine's running, but the driver isn't moving. When they walk up, they find a woman inside. She looks nervous, hands on the wheel, barely making eye contact. They ask her to step out of the vehicle. She shakes her head. Quiet, barely speaking. At first, you might think, okay, maybe she's hiding something. Maybe there are drugs in the car, maybe there's a weapon under the seat. That's the assumption a lot of people make. But the longer this goes on, the more clear it becomes. This isn't about hiding contraband. This is about fear. The challenge is simple on paper, a driver who won't get out of her car. But the reality is much more complicated. And this is where the story starts to pull you in, because you realize it's not just about rules and commands. It's about survival, trauma, and trust. The officers keep repeating themselves. Ma'am, step out of the car. We just need you to cooperate. Every second that passes feels like an hour. Her breathing is heavy. She clutches the steering wheel tighter. One officer reaches for the handle, and that's when her body stiffens up like she's bracing for impact. Think about that. A grown woman frozen in place like she's preparing to be hurt. And the sad part, that reaction doesn't come out of nowhere. For so many black men and women in America, encounters with police aren't just routine. They're life or death. History has written that fear into our DNA. From traffic stops that turn violent to cases that end up on the news, you can't just tell someone calm down when generations of trauma are screaming inside them. But here's the thing. These officers don't know her story yet. They don't know what she's been through. All they see is noncompliance. And in their world, noncompliance can escalate real quick. Now let's pause here. If you were in that car, what would you do? Do you roll the window down, step out, and hope everything goes smooth? Or do you lock the doors and pray that staying put keeps you safe? The woman in this video made her choice. She stayed put, not out of defiance, but out of something else entirely. Minutes pass. The officers start to get frustrated. One of them says, "Why won't you just step out?" And finally, she whispers something. At first, you can't even make it out on the body cam. But then the words become clear. "I'm scared." That's it, 2 words that changed everything. But the cops, they're not done. Fear or not, they need her to comply. Procedures don't pause just because someone is afraid, so they keep pressing. And the more they press, the more tense the air gets. At this point, the audience is torn. On one hand, you get why the cops need her out: safety, procedure, making sure nothing's wrong. On the other hand, you feel her fear in your chest. That silence, those shaky breaths, the way her eyes dart from one officer to the next, it's like she's trapped between 2 bad outcomes, and there's no way out. And this is where we have to zoom out. This isn't just her story. This is the story of thousands of people who freeze up in the presence of authority because they've seen what can happen. Cases like Sandra Bland, Philando Castile, and countless others sit heavy in the back of your mind. So when you're told to just comply, it's not that simple, because compliance hasn't always meant safety. And if you think that was wild, wait until you hear what happened when one of the officers finally understood what she was really hiding. Click here. You won't believe it. Finally, after what feels like forever, one officer kneels down to her window. He lowers his voice, softens his tone. Instead of barking orders, he asks, "Why don't you want to get out?" And this time she answers. Her voice cracks. She tells them about the last time she was pulled over, about how she was yanked out of her car, thrown to the ground, treated like she was nothing. No charges, no explanation, just humiliation and pain. That moment never left her. Every time she saw flashing lights after that, her body remembered. That's the reason she wouldn't get out. It wasn't drugs, it wasn't weapons. It wasn't even about hiding anything illegal. It was trauma, pure, raw trauma. And the look on the officers' faces when they realized it, you could see it. Shock, a little guilt, and maybe, just maybe, understanding. Because for the first time, they weren't looking at a non-compliant suspect. They were looking at a human being who had been broken by the very system they were sworn to uphold. The rest of the footage shows the officers taking a different approach, slowing down, giving her space. Eventually, she does step out, but only after they promise her she won't be hurt. It ends without violence, but the question lingers. How many others have stories like hers? How many people freeze, not because they're guilty, but because they're terrified? This video isn't just about one woman in one car. It's about trust, or the lack of it. It's about what happens when communities carry scars from years of fear, and how those scars show up in the smallest moments, like a woman refusing to unbuckle her seatbelt. So let me ask you, do you think the cops went too far here? Or did they handle it the best they could once they understood her fear? Comment your thoughts below. And if this story hit you, stick around, the next video is even heavier. Subscribe if this gave you value. The last time we left off, we talked about how this wasn't just one woman refusing to get out of her car. It was about trust, or more importantly, the lack of it. About how scars left behind from years of fear can creep up in the smallest, quietest moments. Like we saw, she wasn't refusing because she was guilty. She was refusing because her body remembered. Her mind remembered. And trauma has a way of locking you in place, no matter how many times someone yells, "Just get out." But that's only the surface, because what happened after, that's where this story gets even more layered, even more complicated. After she finally stepped out of the car, slowly, hesitantly, like every muscle in her body was fighting her, the officers seemed to relax, at least a little bit. One of them said, "Thank you," in this calm voice, almost like he knew he had just crossed a line without meaning to. She stood outside the car, shaking. Her knees looked weak, like she might collapse. And in that moment, there was a silence that said more than words ever could. You could almost see both sides thinking the same thing. How did we even get here? But here's the thing about trauma. It doesn't just vanish because someone tells you you're safe now. That fear lingers. It stays in your chest. And in her case, stepping out of the car wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Once she finally started talking, the truth came spilling out. Not in a dramatic way, but in broken pieces. She told them about how her last encounter with police ended with her face pressed into the pavement, her wrists burning from handcuffs that were way too tight, and her dignity stripped away. She hadn't committed a crime back then either. She had been pulled over for a minor traffic violation, something small. But what should have been a routine stop turned into a nightmare. And here's the sad part. When she tried to file a complaint, nobody listened. Her story went into a system that swallowed it up and spat out silence. So when these officers showed up at her window on this night, all of that came rushing back. Let me ask you this. If you had been through that, if you had been treated like that, would you trust the next officer who told you, "It'll be fine, just step out"? This is where the story takes a turn, because now the officers are caught in a moral dilemma. On paper, they had done their job. They saw a driver not following commands, they escalated their tone, and eventually they got her out. But deep down, even they knew this wasn't really a victory. One officer whispered to the other, "She's not dangerous, she's just scared." You could hear the shift in tone from suspicion to sympathy. But sympathy doesn't erase the system. Procedure doesn't bend just because someone has trauma, and that's where things get messy. They had to run her license. They had to check her car. They had to go through the motions. But with every step, you could see her body tense back up like she was preparing for the worst again. And this right here is the bigger picture. This is why stories like this matter, because this wasn't about one bad cop. It wasn't even about one specific incident. It was about the cycle. A cycle where fear meets authority, and authority meets fear, and neither side trusts the other enough to step off the gas. Think about it. How many times have we seen headlines that start with a routine stop and end with tragedy? How many families replay those moments in their heads every time their son, daughter, mother, or father leaves the house and drives past flashing lights? That fear doesn't go away. It sits under the skin, and sometimes it shows up in the form of a woman who just can't bring herself to unbuckle her seatbelt. Back at the scene, something surprising happened. Instead of cuffing her and hauling her in, the officers decided to talk. Really talk. Not the license and registration kind of talk, but human talk. One of them asked, "What can we do to make you feel safe right now?" And when she heard that, her face changed. It was almost like nobody had ever asked her that before. She said quietly, "Just don't touch me." So they didn't. They stood back, they gave her space, they let her breathe. And for the first time in the whole encounter, you could feel the tension start to melt away. Not completely, but enough for her to feel like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't about to relive her nightmare. Now let's pause here, because this right here is the heart of the story. It's not just about a traffic stop. It's about what happens when officers realize that sometimes compliance doesn't come from force but from trust. And trust takes more than authority. It takes empathy. But here's the uncomfortable truth. This was one night with one woman and a couple of officers who happened to take a softer approach. How many others don't get that chance? How many others never make it past that fear alive? That's the question this story forces us to ask. So what happened to her after all this? She wasn't arrested. She wasn't charged. She was let go. On paper, it was nothing more than a stop. But in reality, it was a reminder that scars don't vanish overnight. She drove away that night, but the real question is, did she feel any safer? Did she trust the system any more than before? Probably not, because one calm encounter can't erase years of fear. But it did show something. It showed that when officers slow down, when they stop seeing every person as a threat, things can end without violence. And maybe that's the point. This story is a mirror for cops to see how their actions ripple through communities, a mirror for the rest of us to see how trauma shapes the way people react. Because the truth is, fear doesn't always look logical from the outside. To the officers, it looked like noncompliance. To her, it felt like survival. And until both sides understand that, these stories will keep repeating. The woman in this story walked away. She wasn't hurt. The officers didn't lose their tempers. But for every ending like this, there are too many others that end in tragedy. That's why we tell these stories. To remind ourselves that behind every headline, behind every shaky bodycam video, there's a real human being. Someone carrying scars, someone carrying fear, someone just trying to make it home safe. So do you think this should change the way police are trained? Should they focus more on understanding trauma, or should procedures stay the same? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you thought this story was intense, wait until you hear about the man who refused to roll down his window because of something shocking he had hidden inside. That one will blow your mind. Subscribe if you got value from this.